The house had stood for more than 50 years, its walls holding echoes of laughter, arguments, birthdays, funerals, and quiet evenings where grief and love sat side by side. Every corner carried the fingerprints of a life fully lived. For Eleanor Whitmore, it was not just a house, it was proof that she had survived. She had moved into it as a young bride, holding her husband's hand while he joked about the crooked front step and promised to fix it one day. He never did, and she never wanted him to. After he died, that crooked step became something sacred, a reminder that not everything broken needed repairing. By the time Eleanor turned 79, her body had slowed, but her mind remained sharp. She still paid her bills on time, tended her roses, and remembered every detail of her past with unsettling clarity. She knew exactly where she kept the spare keys, which drawer held her husband's old watch, and which neighbor still owed her a favor from 20 years ago. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that the people she trusted most had already begun planning her disappearance. Her son, Daniel, had always been charming in public, polite, soft-spoken, the kind of man who knew when to smile and when to nod. People admired him easily, especially when he stood beside his pregnant wife, Claire, who spoke gently and touched Eleanor's arm just a little too often. They came over more frequently that year. At first, Eleanor felt grateful. Daniel brought groceries she hadn't asked for. Claire rearranged cabinets without permission, claiming it was for safety. They watched her walk across the room with eyes that lingered too long, measuring every pause, every breath. "You seem tired lately, Mom," Daniel said one afternoon, his voice coated in concern. Eleanor smiled. "I'm nearly 80, darling. Tired comes with the number." Claire laughed softly, but there was something calculating behind her eyes. "It's just, we worry. This house is so big, so many stairs. What if something happens?" Eleanor felt the shift then, not fear, something colder, instinct. Over the next few weeks, the word frail began appearing in every conversation. Frail hands, frail balance, frail memory. Eleanor listened without interrupting, nodding when expected, watching them carefully. She had lived long enough to recognize rehearsed concern. The day they suggested the nursing home, they framed it like a gift. "Just temporary," Daniel said, sitting across from her at the old kitchen table, "until you get your strength back. It's very nice, expensive, private rooms, gardens." Eleanor looked around the kitchen, the same one where she had taught Daniel to read, where his father had collapsed suddenly one winter evening, where grief had settled like dust after the funeral. "And my house?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't meet her eyes. "We'll take care of everything." That night, Eleanor lay awake, listening to the house breathe around her. She felt no panic, no tears, just clarity. Something was wrong, and she would not survive it by being loud. The nursing home smelled of disinfectant and resignation. Eleanor noticed everything immediately: the locked doors, the forced cheerfulness, the way staff spoke loudly even when unnecessary. Daniel hugged her too quickly. Claire adjusted Eleanor's cardigan as if straightening a doll. "We'll visit all the time," Claire said. They didn't. Days passed, then weeks. Eleanor learned the rhythms of the place, the names of the nurses who rushed and the ones who didn't. She learned which residents still remembered their children's faces and which stared out the windows as if waiting for forgiveness that never came. One afternoon, while sitting near the window, Eleanor received a call that changed everything. It was Margaret Lewis. Her voice trembled, not with age, but urgency. "They listed your house," Margaret whispered. "Daniel and Claire, full sale. I saw it myself." Margaret had worked at the local real estate office for decades. She had known Eleanor before Daniel was born. She would not lie. Eleanor closed her eyes slowly. So that was it. The baby, the money. the urgency. That night, After Eleanor left the nursing home, she did not announce her departure. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final speech delivered in a shaking voice. She simply signed herself out, thanked the nurse who had treated her kindly, and stepped into the late afternoon sunlight with a single suitcase and a quiet sense of relief. The world outside felt different when no one was watching her decline. Her neighbor, Thomas Avery, was waiting in his old pickup truck. He had lived 3 houses down from Eleanor for nearly 20 years, exchanging polite waves and seasonal greetings. He had been the one who noticed Daniel's visits grow more frequent, more urgent, more rehearsed. And he had been the one Eleanor called when she realized she needed help that came without conditions. Thomas didn't ask questions as he loaded her suitcase. He didn't comment on how light it was or how steady Eleanor's steps seemed for someone everyone else had called frail. He simply opened the passenger door and said, "Ready when you are." As the nursing home faded in the rearview mirror, Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. A tension she hadn't realized she was carrying finally began to dissolve. The cabin sat at the edge of a wooded valley, modest and unremarkable to anyone passing by. It had belonged to Thomas's sister, who had moved south years earlier. The roof was solid, the windows clean, and the porch wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table. It was not impressive, it was perfect. That first night, Eleanor slept deeply, not the restless sleep of the nursing home, interrupted by alarms and distant coughing, but the kind that settles into the bones and stays. When she woke, sunlight filtered through pine branches, and for a brief moment she forgot her age entirely. Meanwhile, chaos unfolded in the city. Daniel spent hours on the phone, arguing with banks, lawyers, and relatives who no longer returned his calls. Each conversation ended the same way, with suspicion, with silence, or with disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. Claire tried to control the narrative. She told people Eleanor had become confused, that the nursing home had been necessary, that the house sale was meant to secure the baby's future. She spoke quickly, defensively, as though volume could replace truth. But the truth had paperwork, and paperwork doesn't flinch. When investigators traced the attempted sale, they found the trust, they found the blocked transfer, they found signatures that didn't belong to Eleanor. What Daniel had dismissed as a technicality became a liability. Family members began to talk to one another. Cousins Eleanor hadn't seen in years called her cabin, their voices heavy with apology. Old friends stopped by with food, stories, and quiet gratitude that she was still herself. Daniel noticed the shift most clearly at a family gathering he wasn't invited to. Someone had mentioned Eleanor's name, not with pity, with respect. At the cabin, Eleanor established routines: morning tea on the porch, short walks through the trees, reading in the afternoon. She cooked simple meals and wrote letters, real ones on paper, something she hadn't done in years. One evening, Thomas asked gently, "Do you regret it?" Eleanor knew what he meant. "No," she said after a moment. "I regret trusting silence when I should have trusted observation." Weeks turned into months. The investigation concluded without criminal charges, but the damage was done. Daniel's reputation in the community fractured. Word travels quickly when betrayal wears a familiar face. Friends distanced themselves. Opportunities vanished quietly. Claire, overwhelmed and resentful, blamed Eleanor openly, then privately, then silently when no one listened anymore. Their child was born into a house already strained by debt and resentment. Eleanor sent a gift, not money, a small handmade blanket, no note. Time did what time always does. It clarified. Eleanor aged, but she did not disappear. She volunteered at the local library. She helped neighbors with errands. She became known as the woman who lived alone but was never lonely. Sometimes, late in the evening, she thought of the Daniel used to believe consequences arrived loudly. He imagined them as shouting matches, slammed doors, public confrontations. What he hadn't expected was silence. The first silence came from his phone. Messages left unread, calls that rang until voicemail then weren't returned at all. People who once asked about his work, his plans, his growing family, now answered with polite distance, or not at all. He told himself it was temporary. At night, when Claire finally slept, Daniel lay awake replaying moments he had dismissed too easily. His mother's pause before agreeing to the nursing home, the way she looked at him when he said the house would be taken care of. He remembered how calm she had been when the accounts froze, not confused, not frightened, certain. That certainty unsettled him more than anger ever could. He tried once more to reach her. He drove to the cabin unannounced, rehearsing apologies in the car that shifted shape with every mile. When he arrived, he saw her sitting on the porch, sunlight touching her hair, a book resting open in her lap. She did not look abandoned. She looked free. Daniel stood at the edge of the yard for a long time before she noticed him. When she did, she didn't rise, she didn't frown, she simply closed the book and waited. "I just wanted to see how you were," he said, the words thinner than he intended. "I'm well," Eleanor replied, and it was true. He wanted to explain, to soften what he had done by naming his fears, his debts, his sense of urgency. He wanted her to understand how quickly responsibility had turned into desperation. But Eleanor didn't ask. "You're safe here," he said finally, gesturing at the cabin, as though offering reassurance. "I was never unsafe. I was being managed." The word landed between them like a verdict. Daniel nodded, swallowed, and left without another word. Life continued unevenly. Claire grew resentful of a story she could not control. Her bitterness found small outlets, sharp remarks, tense silences, complaints delivered to people who no longer sympathized. The weight of choices made too quickly, for reasons too shallow, settled heavily over their household. Meanwhile, Eleanor's world expanded quietly. She attended community dinners. She laughed more easily. She allowed herself small indulgences, a better tea, a new shawl, an extra hour spent watching the sunset instead of doing something useful. Age still visited her, of course. There were slower mornings, careful steps, days when her joints reminded her of time's passage, but none of it felt like decline. It felt like honesty. One autumn afternoon, Eleanor sat with Thomas on the porch as leaves drifted lazily to the ground. She spoke of her husband then, of the years that had shaped her patience, her caution, her strength. "I loved being a mother," she said softly, "but motherhood ends when you're no longer seen as a person." Thomas didn't interrupt. "I wanted Daniel to have everything. What I didn't want was to be erased to give it to him." Winter came gently. Eleanor's health weakened gradually, without drama. She planned for it the same way she had planned everything else, quietly, thoroughly, with dignity. She updated her documents. She named beneficiaries who had shown care, not entitlement. She left instructions not for possessions, but for moments, where to scatter ashes, who should receive her letters, which books should be donated. Daniel learned of her passing from a distant relative. He attended the small gathering at the cabin, standing at the edge of the group. No one pushed him away, no one welcomed him warmly either. Eleanor had been clear about that, too. She had left him one letter. In it, she did not scold, she did not accuse. She wrote only this: "I hope one day you understand that love does not require surrender. I forgave you long before you asked. What I could not do was disappear for your comfort." Daniel read the letter alone, long after everyone else had gone. Years later, when people spoke of Eleanor Whittemore, they didn't speak of betrayal. They spoke of a woman who knew when to be gentle and when to stand, of a mother who refused to vanish quietly, of a life reclaimed. Years passed and the cabin remained much the same. The porch boards weathered under countless seasons. The trees grew taller, their shadows stretching farther across the land. Neighbors came and went, children grew, and the world continued in its restless hurry. But the memory of Eleanor Whittemore stayed still, anchored in quiet strength. People who had known her spoke of small things, the way she listened without interrupting, the way she never rushed her words, the way she understood that dignity was not something given by others, but something protected from within. No plaque marked the cabin, no grand memorial stood in her name, and she would have preferred it that way. Daniel carried her letter for many years, folded carefully, read less often than he should have, but never forgotten. It followed him through jobs that never quite fit, friendships that never fully returned, and moments when he wondered how differently life might have unfolded had he chosen patience over control. He never tried to justify himself again. Claire moved on in her own way, chasing stability where admiration had once been. The past became something she avoided speaking of, not because it hurt, but because it exposed too much. The child grew, unaware at first of the story that had shaped their beginning. One day, much later, they would ask, and Daniel would struggle to explain how love could exist alongside harm and how easily fear could disguise itself as responsibility. Some lessons arrive too late to fix anything, but not too late to remember. On quiet evenings when the wind moved through the trees just right, Thomas swore he could hear Eleanor's laughter echo faintly from the porch, not haunting, not sad, just present, as if to remind anyone listening that freedom does not always roar, sometimes it simply walks away. And in doing so, it leaves behind a truth no one can sell, steal, or silence. A life lived with self-respect outlasts every betrayal. And that is where this story ends.